Hello, thank you for joining us today in the Hugh Mercer Apothecary shop. I'm Ethan Burgess, and today I am pleased to introduce Genevieve Bugay. Mrs. Bugay has served as the site manager of the apothecary since 1979. She is considered by many to be the expert on Dr. Mercer. It is truly an honor, and thank you for welcoming me here today.
You're quite welcome. I'd be happy to be here.
So I'm really excited for this conversation we're about to have, and I have to start by stating that this room is well known to locals, with the various medicines, ingredients, glass containers, and tools all on display for the curious mind to explore. How does this differ from the experience from that of other museums?
Well, what I hope we've achieved is a hands-on experience where people can touch, smell, feel the actual tools, smell the plants, the medicinal plants, and try to portray a first-person atmosphere. We are portraying servants of Dr. Mercer who happen to be here. He's out. The visitors come in to see him, and so since he's out, we are entertaining them until he returns, just so that they can be brought into the 18th century. We are portraying 1774. There was a lot going on at that time, politically and historically, and we try to bring that out so that people can be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Many have remarked how they step off of a busy modern street in downtown Fredericksburg and come into this world where these people from 1774 know what the weather was going on at that time, what are the local politics and economy, what is everything going on in the area. And so that's something that I'm sure you're very proud of. When did that first person immersion get developed?
Well, when I first came to the shop, it was what I call a furniture tour. There were no herbs, and there were glass cases on the counters. The tools were in the cases. All you saw were counters, cases with things in it, bottles on the shelves, and some furniture. And I had originally worked at HFFI Museum at the Chimneys. And on one occasion we had some reenactors come in. And one of them was a gentleman who portrayed a doctor, and he was doing the same thing, first person medical thing. It was for children, and he'd have the children come up and he would diagnose their illness and treat them. And I remembered him, and his name was Charles Young. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we could do that at the apothecary shop? So along with some of the other people here, with Gil Braxton and Mary Ann Rowe and various others who were running the business, we decided, let's give it a try. So we contacted Dr. Young, and he came in and he provided us with our first herbs, or some of the tools that we still use. He helped us write our first script and got us started doing the first person tour here.
So, on to Dr. Mercer. He lived quite an exciting life. How would you choose to introduce this remarkable person?
Well, I rather feel that Dr. Mercer would not have thought himself remarkable. I think he was a doctor who had a great interest and perhaps a talent for the military. I think he'd rather have been a soldier than a doctor. He seemed to bump into wars every time he turned around. He served in 3 wars, actually. The Jacobite Uprising, the French and Indian, and the Revolution, and seemed to be quite good at it, that kind of thing. He earned the respect of all his military peers. Washington once said, in speaking of him, that in Mercer's judgment and you can be relied on. So he thought a great deal of Mercer's military ability. So I think that we would find that he was a man who was a doctor, but was also a very dedicated military man, and was dedicated to the idea of independence.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So fans of the Outlander show may be surprised to learn that right here in Fredericksburg was someone who was at the Battle of Culloden. So can you elaborate on the importance of that historic event and why it caused Hugh Mercer to come to the Americas?
Well, that event was life-changing for all of the Scots. And of course, the Scots had been trying for a very long time to break away from England, or to break the English king. The King of England, the one we're talking about in Outlander, was George II, or George III. And it started with George I. He was German. He was from Hanover, but he was a Protestant. And the English didn't want a Catholic king. So the king should have been a Stuart, a Scot, but he was Catholic. So the English Parliament brought over this German, and the Scots never accepted him. And over the years, there were several uprisings against him. And then this one in 1745 brought over from France, where he was in exile, finding Prince Charlie, who was the son of who the Scots thought was the rightful king, James Stuart. Well, of course, throughout the year, they had various battles, lost some, won some. But Culloden was the final battle, and that was a terrible disaster for the Scots. They were defeated in a most awful way. And the king apparently wanted to get rid of the Scottish problem once and for all. And so he sent his son in charge of the army to just destroy the Scottish life entirely. Kill anyone he could get his hands on, man, woman, child.
A total war.
Yeah, it was just, just burn their houses, their crops, their livestock. He forbid the use of the bagpipes. He forbid the tartan, wearing the tartans.
Oh my goodness.
He had them turn in all their weapons and completely destroyed the Highland life. And Dr. Mercer's part, the local lord was Lord Fitzsligo. Lord Fitzsligo joined Prince Charlie's army. And of course, Mercer went along with it. He had just gotten out of college. He was 19, he was in his early teens, in his mid-teens, I guess. And this was all the others were going, and so he went along with Lord Fitzsligo. Lord Fitzsligo's troop was assigned to be near the prince at the Battle of Culloden. And when they saw the way the battle was going, the prince told everyone to run for your lives, do the best you can, get out of here, and so Mercer and the rest left. Dr. Mercer probably went back to his home in Fraserburgh. The local doctor there was a Dr. Cruikshank. Dr. Cruikshank was also in Prince Charlie's army. Later in the year, he was arrested by the British Army, was taken off to prison, and was never seen again. He probably died in prison. He was an older man.
So Hugh Mercer was a student and
he was a student.
Took over the business from there?
He, instead of staying there to take the business, because this was the only doctor in the area, he decided it would be wise for him to leave. So that was when he left to Scotland, came to America. This was in 1747. So that was his part at the Battle of Culloden. He didn't actually take part of the fighting because he was attached to the prince's side.
So do you think that critical event and the opposition towards the English crown is what inspired him to be a lifelong soldier, do you think?
It probably did. I think watching, he realized that he had an interest in that.
Yes.
And
Yes, there was never a point in his life where conflict and battle was a faraway concept that you heard about. From early on, he understood the dangers and
he was right in the thick of it.
So despite fleeing Scotland as a young man, would you say that Scottish culture remained important to him throughout his life? And is it critical to understand that about him today?
It's hard to say, but he joined the St. Andrew Society. The St. Andrew Society was formed in 1747, I think it's in Philadelphia, to assist all of these Scottish immigrants who were coming over to escape the life in Scotland, and it was to help those who needed help. And so he joined the St. Andrew Society. Actually, it still is in existence, and they own his sword.
Okay.
His sword, the St. Andrew Society loaned his sword to the Museum of American Revolution in Philadelphia.
So a fascinating subject for local historians is Hugh Mercer's family. Could you introduce us to his wife and children?
Okay. He was married to Isabella Gordon and had 5 children. Actually, the 5th child was born after he was killed. He never saw that child. That one was, he tried to name Hugh. The two boys were William and George, were both deaf. William became a well-known portrait artist and made his career as a lifetime as a portrait artist. We're not sure much about George, but both of them were deaf, which at that time was a terrible thing because they were considered feeble-minded, mentally incapable of doing anything. Well, William showed that he was able to make a life as an artist. He studied with John Trumbull and did very well. There was another son, John, and then Anna, the daughter, married a Robert Patton of Fredericksburg, and the George Patton of World War II fame is a descendant of that marriage. George Weaving became the surrogate father to the children after Dr. Mercer was killed. Weaving was married to Isabella's sister, Catherine. So the children lived most of their life down at the Sentry Box. And Isabella Gordon, her father had a tavern, Gordon's Tavern, on the corner over there. And we know that much about her.
Indeed. So I'd like to briefly touch on Hugh Mercer the General before we get back to talking more about the shop. So some Fredericksburg residents might not have heard of his service nor visited his statue here on Washington Avenue. How was his career leading up to the Battle of Princeton so different from his contemporaries, and how did it relate to his occupation as a doctor?
I don't think his career was much different, actually, because the Patriots at that time were not only served as soldiers, but they were regular people. Like Henry Knox, he was a bookseller. George Weaving was a tavern keeper. And Benjamin Rush, the signer of the Declaration of Independence, was a doctor. So these were people who were just ordinary people, but with their desire for independence and determination, they put aside their profession and became soldiers themselves.
So was his first military experience in this area with the Spotsylvania Committee of Safety with the militia?
Yeah, he's in charge of the local committee of safety. He's in the local militia. He's in charge of the local militia. I don't know if many people know about what he did in April '75 when Governor Dunmore took the powder out of the magazine. Mercer called all the local militias together, brought 600 men here to Fredericksburg to march down to Williamsburg to retrieve the gunpowder. And it was only at the last minute they got a letter from Peyton Randolph saying, "Better not, better not come." The governor's vowed he'll give it back. So he was very active in events before the actual outbreak of war.
So Mercer's tragic yet heroic end at the Battle of Princeton is a chilling story, truly. Was the reality of it as dramatic as depicted in paintings like John Trumbull?
Okay, the painting of John Trumbull is very dramatic.
Yes.
It's also got too many people in it. George Washington wasn't there on the site. He was at another part of the battlefield. And there probably weren't as many bodies lying around at that point, but it was dramatic. And that's where I'd like to read something. So Benjamin, when Washington heard that Mercer was wounded, he sent his aide-de-camp, who was George Lewis, the son of Betty and Fielding Lewis of Kenmore, down to see about him. And Mercer told Lewis that the story that's going around is wrong. It is my fault. These words Lewis later recorded. And Mercer said, I was brought to the ground by a blow from a musket. His horse had been shot up whenever he was on the ground. And he was trying to rally the troops that were retreating. The British had bayonets, and they were afraid of the bayonets, so they were retreating. He was on foot trying to rally them. He was brought to the ground by a musket. The enemy discovered my rank, exulted in their having taken the rebel general. I felt that I deserved not so opprobrious an epithet, and determined to die as I had lived, an honored soldier in a just and righteous cause, and without begging for my life or making reply, I lunged with my sword at the nearest man. They then bayoneted and left me. So those are Mercer's words, but I thought it was more dramatic.
Yes, because they're earnest and directly from him. They clear up the story but reveal truly a more personally dramatic one.
Yes.
Because it describes his lifelong character.
So I thought that gives a good picture of who he was or what he was.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So now turning a little bit towards the history of this particular building. This next question might reveal a little bit of trivia for local history buffs. Was this the building that Dr. Mercer practiced in?
No, this was not Dr. Mercer's building. It had been thought to be for many years because they knew that his building was at this intersection, and this was the only 18th century building at this intersection, and so the story went that this was his shop, but further research discovered it was not. It was either diagonally across the street or right directly across the street. There were two ads in the Virginia Gazette of that time. One says that his shop was across from Henry Mitchell's store. This was Henry Mitchell's store. Henry Mitchell was a tobacco merchant. He was a factor for a company in Glasgow that would buy the tobacco from the outlying plantations and put them on his ships out in the river there. He also maintained a store along with that. Diagonally across the street was Mrs. Julian's Tavern. And one of the ads in the Virginia Gazette says it was across from Mrs. Julian's Tavern.
Mm-hmm.
John Julian, Mrs. Julian's son, was a partner with Dr. Mercer.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not sure exactly at which building, or it may have been at one at both at different times. We don't know. Dr. Mercer did rent a building, at least a building on this corner. So this was not Dr. Mercer's shop, but it was. We had dendrochronology done,
Mm-hmm.
and it was found that the beams in the basement were from a tree that was from trees that were felled between 1771 and 72. So we do know the date of the building. Henry Mitchell's store opened in 1772.
Well, there you go.
So,
In what other ways has this building been used? How did it eventually become interpreted as the apothecary shop?
well, originally, as we've said, it was the tobacco merchant's shop. Henry Mitchell had an interesting life too, but anyway. And then it became probably a private residence. And then in the early 1800s, it was a general store. This was Henderson's store in the early 1800s. Then I think it just kind of went down. And with photographs we have of it taken in the 1920s and 30s show a very derelict building.
Mm. That's unfortunate. And is it true that there was an auto dealership here at one point?
There was. We have photographs of it. Yes, it was a Ford dealership. We have pictures of it as the signs on the outside of the building, advertising spark plugs and such. Actually, a descendant of the man who had the shop used to be a guide here. Mm-hmm. And he said they had the Model T or Model A or whatever it was at that time. They had a doorway where that fireplace is now. And when in the winter, they'd bring the car in, and this was the showroom. In the summer, they just parked the cars they were selling outside on the street.
So our discussion has now returned to modern times. In addition to the thousands of tours given throughout the year, hundreds of local fourth graders bring home news each spring about leeches, lancets, and more than a few bizarre 18th century remedies. It's a memorable experience, and it was for me when I toured as a fourth grader. So to you as the educator, what makes the apothecary so vital to local schools' curriculum?
Well, I think from a teacher's point of view, probably that some of the aspects of the tour fit their SOL requirements and the STEM requirements. To me, it's more of a personal thing that I think we try to bring the children into the fact that children like them lived 200 years ago, and they got sick just as these children get sick, they get injured, and these are the treatments that were the common and up-to-date, the modern treatments for those ailments at that time compared to what happens to them now. And it shows the advance of medical science over the 200 years. Maybe they can see that when I get sick for this, doctors now give me such and such, or maybe something in the future I can find something to be even better than this remedy. So maybe it would stimulate their thinking to see how to make medicine progress. And also with leeches, now the fascination with leeches is fun. You know, you can take out blood, is supposed to be good for you, but even today, doctors are using leeches. We bring this up to show them that some things don't change, but maybe the use of them have changed somewhat, because now they're using leeches for other purposes.
Certainly. Another fantastic site for those who tour is the garden. Visitors and locals alike who have a moment to step around back find themselves immersed in an authentic 18th century medicinal garden. What does it take to upkeep such a precious repository?
Hard work. I have a fantastic head gardener, Ian, and he is amazing in his enthusiasm and his energy. He's out. In fact, he was there this morning, putting in, doing more work.
And it involves coordinating with volunteers as well.
Yeah, and then we have the volunteers. One of my guides, Susan, is another enthusiastic, most energetic person. She's amazing. She's always out there doing something, planting something, picking something, removing something. And then we have Mike and his master gardeners, who also are doing a great deal of work for us, and then the Town and Country Garden Club. So it takes all of those people to keep our jungle growing and flourishing and under control.
Certainly. It's something a little bit different for those walking down the streets here in Fredericksburg to turn and see this. It's kind of a bit of breath of fresh air, something different on this
Well, I think it's also fun that you have their Mary Washington Garden, Mary Washington House Garden in Kenmore. They're formal gardens. Ours is not a formal pleasure garden. Ours is a working garden. So it may look like a jungle, but the idea is that parts of these plants that are useful to the doctor can only be harvested at the tip of the growing season, where finally the plant has gotten 5 feet tall to get the seeds out of it.
And there's always a history camp that brings youth between ages 8 and 12 to the garden. Do you have a favorite memory being a part of this hands-on education?
I don't have any one memory. What my memory is the enthusiasm that all of the children seem to have. They all seem, over the years, they've all been excited and enjoyed learning, participating, and running around out in the garden. And it's just an enthusiasm of the children.
Yes, and it can be a little infectious, no pun intended.
You're right.
Because if they come and get a tour, they might talk about it with their friends and their family members, and then they come and they attend one of our summer camp programs, and it reinforces knowledge that they've already gained, and then they can share it with their friends and fellow students.
And it's a hands-on thing. Like we make pills. We show them how difficult it was to make pills. And there's the leeches, of course, always the leeches. So it's something that they have a chance then to handle them, to feel them, to know how disgusting they are.
Yes. So you mentioned earlier about the outlaw of bagpipes in Scotland. So today, those who might walk by the apothecary have the fortunate opportunity to hear bagpipes being played on occasion. So it could be Hugh Mercer's birthday celebration in January or one of many other events. And I understand during the birthday celebration, visitors get to have a brief free tour and some free cake and punch. What truly makes that event so popular?
I think it's a lovely way to remember him. Of course, we have the music, we have the refreshments, and we also they have an opportunity to talk to Dr. Mercer in the Trip Wiggins portrays him for us very, very well, and so you can talk to him.
The doctor is finally
the doctor is in.
If you come year round and ask.
Right. So I think it's a good way to remember someone who definitely needs to be remembered.
Certainly. And another popular event that's free to the public is the reading of the Declaration of Independence every July 4th. Where did the idea for this unique living history opportunity come about?
Now, I can't take credit for that. Over the years, I've always felt on the 4th of July that the emphasis was not placed in the correct place. There's too much emphasis on fireworks and sales and not much of what the day really means. And then I heard that the Port Royal Historical Society, I'm not sure that's the exact title of them, but it was a group of people in Port Royal who were very interested in the history, were doing it, reading the Declaration. So I thought, why not us? And so we started, I thought, well, we have our own local hero.
It brings some of the ideas and the words behind why we're having this revolution, and it serves as a great reminder because many people may be walking past, they have their shorts and t-shirts on and hats and sunscreen ready for a long day of outdoor activities leading up to fireworks, and it's something different for them to hear someone in 18th century clothing read aloud the very words which may not be always present in our memory exactly what the Declaration was saying.
If they listen to it, they'll hear, if this is the words, the words are very modern, almost contemporary to what's going on in our politics today and our political life. You can hear in some of the words that they were saying over 200 years ago, things that we could probably be saying today. Mm-hmm. So at least if they're hearing something, if they're thinking about it, they're hearing something that is applicable to our life today.
And you've mentioned as well why it's important to remember Hugh Mercer. Could you kind of conclude a little bit why he's so relatable to today?
I think because he had a comfortable life here. He was one of only 3 doctors in town, so he had a good practice. But he had a desire for independence and a determination to put it all aside, his comfortable life aside, and to do what he could to make it happen.
Thank you, Genevieve, for coming and spending this time with me today. It's much appreciated.
You're very much welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for visiting us today at Washington Heritage Museums. Goodbye.